영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
Around the World in 80 Days. Chapter 1, London, England, 1872. Mr. Phileas Fogg was a mystery. No one knew how he had made his fortune, but there was no doubt that he was rich. He was in his 40s, tall, well-built, with handsome features. He had light hair, pale skin, and excellent teeth. He was one of the most prominent members of London's Reform Club, and yet he attracted little attention. It was clear to those who knew him that Phileas Fogg was a traveler. He was familiar with the world and knew the details of even the most remote areas of the earth. It was also certain, however, that Mr. Fogg had not left London in many years. He lived a quiet single life with no wife or children to keep him company, and his daily routine never changed. On October 2nd, 1872, Mr. Fogg sat squarely in his armchair in his mansion on Savile Row. His hands were resting on his knees and his body was straight. He was watching a complicated clock that told the seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, and years all at once. A knock sounded at the front door, and before long, Mr. Fogg's servant, who was leaving that day, appeared.
"The new servant is here to see you, sir,"
he said. Then a young man about 30 years old entered the room and bowed.
"You're a Frenchman, I believe,
Asked Phileas Fogg.
and your name is John?"
Jean, if monsieur pleases.
Replied the newcomer.
My name is Jean Passepartout. My surname suits me because I have a natural ability to move from one business to another. I believe I'm honest, monsieur, and I've had several jobs. I've been a singer, a circus acrobat, a tightrope walker, a gymnastics teacher, and finally, a fireman in Paris.
"Well, Mr. Passepartout,
Said Mr. Fogg.
you have been well recommended to me. I have heard good reports about you."
Thank you, monsieur.
Said Passepartout.
I wish now to enjoy a quiet domestic life as a valet here in England. I have heard that you are a most exact and settled gentleman, so I have come in hope of living a tranquil life. Maybe I will even forget the name of Passepartout.
"You know my conditions."
Asked Mr. Fogg.
Yes, monsieur.
Said Passepartout.
"Good. What time is it?"
Asked Mr. Fogg. Taking a huge silver watch from his pocket, Passepartout replied.
25 minutes after 11.
"Your watch is slow."
Said Mr. Fogg.
Pardon me, monsieur, it is impossible.
Said Passepartout.
"It is 4 minutes too slow."
Said Mr. Fogg.
"No matter. It's enough only to mention the error. Now, from this moment, 29 minutes after 11 a.m., this Wednesday, the 2nd of October, you're in my service."
Mr. Fogg stood up, and without a further word he put on his hat and left. Every day at exactly 11:30 a.m., Mr. Fogg left his house and walked to the Reform Club. He was so precise that he never appeared to be rushed or agitated in any way. He was the most deliberate person in the world and always reached his destination at the very moment that he was due. At 11:30 then, Passepartout found himself alone in the house on Savile Row. He began an inspection and was pleased to find the house clean and arranged neatly. When Passepartout reached the second floor, he recognized at once the room that was meant for him. Hanging over the clock above the fireplace was the daily routine of the house, written on a card. It explained Passepartout's duties, from 8 in the morning, when Mr. Fogg got up, until 11:30, when Mr. Fogg left for his club. It explained the tea and toast at 8:23, the shaving water at 9:37, and the washcloth, soap, and washbowl at 9:40. In Mr. Fogg's closet, each pair of pants, coat, and vest had a number on it. This indicated the time of year and the season when it would be worn. Mr. Fogg used the same system for his shoes as well. Having inspected the house from top to bottom, Passepartout rubbed his hands together.
This is just what I wanted.
He said.
We will get along well together, Mr. Fogg and I.
Meanwhile, Mr. Phileas Fogg had put his right foot before his left foot 575 times, and his left foot before his right foot 576 times, and reached the Reform Club. He immediately went into the dining room and took his place at his usual table, which had already been set for him. Phileas Fogg's lunch consisted of a broiled fish with sauce and a slice of roast beef garnished with mushrooms. He also ate a rhubarb and gooseberry tart and a morsel of Cheshire cheese. The entire meal was washed down with several cups of tea. Mr. Fogg rose at 13 minutes to 1 and went into the large hall. He found his regular chair in his regular corner and happily sat down to pass the afternoon as he did every day, quietly reading the newspapers amidst the comfortable and lavish surroundings of his club.
Hello. I am Jean Passepartout, and the year is 1872 during the Victorian era. London is the largest and most modern city on earth. Its streets are very crowded with people and horse-drawn carriages. Below the streets, trains, which were invented less than 50 years ago, travel through the London Underground. A lot of great scientific discovery has occurred lately. At night, London streets are now lit by gas lamps. If you have an urgent message to send, you can send it by electronic wire using Morse code. Perhaps you've heard of Morse code? It uses a series of dots and dashes to relay information. London is the capital not only of England, but also of the vast British Empire. Queen Victoria rules over almost 1/4 of the Earth's land. People often say the sun never sets on the British Empire. That's because it's always daytime in at least one of the Queen's territories.
Around the World in 80 Days, Chapter 2, The Wager. At Phileas Fogg's mansion, Passepartout had read and memorized the card listing his master's daily routine. He knew that Mr. Fogg would not be back until exactly midnight, so Passepartout set about keeping himself busy until his services were needed again. Passepartout had a pleasant face and a well-built, muscular body. He had tumbled brown hair, blue eyes, and a ruddy complexion. In his early years, Passepartout had been a sort of vagrant and was not at all brash or snobby. He had already worked in 10 English houses, but so far, he had failed to find the peace he was looking for. He was happy to have finally found a master who suited him. Back at the Reform Club, shortly after 6 o'clock that evening, Mr. Fogg finished his dinner. Then he joined 5 other club members for a game of whist. Mr. Fogg was a regular player, and his evening card game was an unchanging part of his routine. The men settled down at a table in front of a fire, and the conversation soon turned to current affairs.
What about that robbery, then?
Asked one player.
Oh, the bank will lose the money.
Replied another.
The Daily Telegraph says that the thief is a gentleman.
Said Mr. Fogg as he set down his newspaper to pick up his cards.
A man that makes off with £55,000 is no gentleman.
Said another.
Possibly not.
Replied Mr. Fogg.
But he was reported to be a well-dressed gentleman with polished manners and a well-to-do air about him.
The conversation subsided as the men began their game. When they paused to deal the cards for a second game, the conversation returned to the robbery.
Where could the gentleman, if that's what we must call him, go?
Exclaimed one player.
It would be very difficult to flee with all that money.
Said another.
No country will be safe for him.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
Said another man.
The world is big enough.
It was once,
Said Mr. Fogg.
but no longer. It is now possible to go around the world in 80 days. That is true.
Said one man.
Impossible.
Said another.
What if the trains stop running in India, or a storm delays a steamer? What then? All accounted for and anticipated in 80 days.
Stated Mr. Fogg with confidence.
I'd like to see you do it.
Said the player sitting opposite him.
I'd like nothing better than to do it.
Said Mr. Fogg, looking at him calmly.
When?
Asked the man.
At once.
Said Mr. Fogg, smiling.
It's absurd.
Cried another player.
Let's get on with the game.
Suddenly, the man who was about to deal put the cards down and spoke up.
Fair enough, Mr. Fogg. I will wager £4,000 on it.
I will too.
Said another, looking to the other players.
And so will I.
said another, and then another, until all 5 men agreed. Mr. Fogg looked up from his cards and said,
I have a deposit of £20,000 at the bank that I will gladly risk on it. £20,000? £20,000 that you could lose by a single accidental delay?
asked the man who had bet first.
The unforeseen does not exist,
Replied Mr. Fogg,
But, Mr. Fogg,
said the man.
80 days are only an estimate of the minimum time the journey can take. For this journey, that minimum will suffice.
Said Mr. Fogg.
And in order not to exceed the 80 days,
The man continued.
you'll need to be very precise when transferring from trains to steamers and from steamers to trains. I will be very precise, gentlemen.
Said Mr. Fogg. Phileas Fogg's card partners were both thrilled and concerned. They were thrilled by a bet they felt certain to win. But they were concerned that Mr. Fogg was risking a lot of money on a whim.
If you are joking, we accept the joke and let you off.
Offered one man.
A true Englishman doesn't joke when he is talking about something as serious as a wager.
Replied Mr. Fogg.
I will bet £20,000 against anyone that I can tour the world in 80 days or less. Do you accept?
Hello again. Gentlemen's clubs are private clubs for men from the English upper class. In other words, they are not for men like me. Members use gentlemen's clubs almost as second homes. They go to these clubs to relax, meet their friends, and enjoy delicious meals. Mr. Fogg is a member of the Reform Club, and he spends most of his days there. The Reform Club was founded in 1836. Membership quickly grew to 1,000, and the club's governing committee commissioned an architect to design its current building, located at 104 Pall Mall. This street actually has quite a few gentlemen's clubs along it. The Reform Club is a splendid place. Based on the Farnese Palace in Rome, its central hall is encircled by grand pillars and a spacious upper gallery. It has a wonderful kitchen, which was designed according to the chef's specifications. The Reform Club's library contains over 50,000 books. The Reform Club was founded by a political party known as the Radicals, who embraced liberal political ideas. So besides being a social club, it is also a political meeting place. Members use the space to share news, hold meetings, plan campaign strategies, and conduct other party business.
Around the World in 80 Days. Chapter 3. The Journey Begins. Phileas Fogg's 5 whist opponents all looked at each other, nodded, and said unanimously,
We accept.
Mr. Fogg's wager to travel around the world in 80 days was on,
Good.
said Phileas Fogg.
The train leaves for Dover at 9:15. I will take it. This very evening?
One of the men said,
Yes, this very evening.
said Mr. Fogg. He then took out his pocket almanac and added,
Today is Wednesday, October 2nd. I shall be due in London in this very room of the Reform Club on Saturday, December 21st, at 9:15 p.m. If I am late, £20,000 now deposited in my name at Baring's Bank will belong to you.
Then Mr. Fogg pulled out his checkbook and signed a check with his fountain pen.
In fact, gentlemen,
He said.
here is a check for the amount.
The men drafted a contract outlining the wager, and everyone signed it. During this whole exchange, Phileas Fogg maintained his usual cool composure. He had not bet to win, but merely to live up to his word. He had staked £20,000, half his fortune. He thought he might have to spend the other half to carry out this difficult project. The clock struck 7, and the group agreed to suspend the game so Mr. Fogg could prepare for his departure.
It is unnecessary, gentlemen. I am quite ready now.
Was Mr. Fogg's response.
It is your turn, I believe.
He said to the man on his left. So after winning 20 guineas at whist and taking leave of his friends, Phileas Fogg, at 7:25, left the Reform Club and made his way home. When Mr. Fogg arrived home, Passepartout was surprised. His master was not due until exactly midnight. Mr. Fogg immediately went to his room and called for his servant. But Passepartout did not reply. Mr. Fogg could not be calling for him. It was not the right hour.
Passepartout?
Repeated Mr. Fogg without raising his voice. Passepartout arrived.
I've called you twice.
Said his master.
But it is not midnight.
Said Passepartout, showing Mr. Fogg his watch.
I know that. I don't blame you, but we start for Dover and Calais in 10 minutes.
Said Mr. Fogg.
You are going to leave home?
Asked Passepartout with a puzzled look on his face.
Yes,
Said his master.
we are going around the world.
Passepartout opened his eyes wide and looked like he might collapse.
Around the world?
He murmured.
In 80 days,
Replied Mr. Fogg.
so we haven't a moment to lose.
But I must pack our trunks.
Passepartout said.
We will have no trunks, only a carpet bag with 2 shirts and 3 pairs of socks for me, and the same for you. We will buy our clothes on the way.
Said Mr. Fogg. Passepartout tried to reply but couldn't. He left Mr. Fogg's room, climbed the stairs to his own room, and fell into the closest chair. Was his master a fool? No. Was this a joke? It didn't seem so. They were going to Dover and then to Calais in France. Passepartout thought a moment later. After all, Passepartout had been away from France for 5 years. He would not be sorry to see his native soil again. Remembering there was no time to waste, Passepartout packed the carpet bag and was ready by 8 o'clock. Mr. Fogg was ready as well. He was carrying the railway and steamer timetable under his arm. He then took the carpet bag, opened it, and slipped a huge roll of banknotes inside it.
You have forgotten nothing?
He asked Passepartout.
No, nothing, sir.
Replied Passepartout.
Good. Take this carpet bag.
Mr. Fogg said, handing it to Passepartout.
Take good care of it because there is £20,000 in it.
Passepartout nearly dropped the bag, as if the £20,000 were as heavy as gold. Mr. Fogg and Passepartout then left the house, locked the door securely, and took a cab to Charing Cross railway station. The cab stopped in front of the station at 8:25, exactly 25 minutes before the train was to depart.
Oh my. I had thought I would be settling down for a nice quiet life. But suddenly I found out I was about to travel around the world. And in 80 days. Mr. Fogg told me that our trip will start in Dover. Located at the southeastern tip of England, Dover is famous for its tall white cliffs, which are made of pure white chalk. In fact, these white cliffs gave England its most ancient name, Albion, which means white. Dover is one of the busiest places to cross the English Channel. Traffic through this port town has boomed since the railway connected it to London. People traveling on the London-Dover train can take the 21-mile ferry ride across the English Channel to Calais, France. There, they can hop on the Calais-Paris train. So far, our journey around the world sounds easy, right? Well, we'll see what happens next.